Hello, my friends. Hello. Oh my gosh. And of course, the dog. Hello, Trish. How are you? Oh my gosh. Yes, yes, yes. Better go eat it. Where is it? Jemima, did you take both? I've got one dog that loves to steal the treats from the other dog. Okay. So today we're going to talk about the Munich Olympic massacre. And let me start off by saying that for anybody that watches this as a video replay later, it originally aired as a live stream. So you will hear me occasionally interact with people. Let me also give a disclaimer that I am Jewish. And so this was very emotional for me. I don't want it to come across as being angered or hurt or upset simply because I'm Jewish, because I'm angered and I'm hurt and I'm upset about this, even though I was 4 years old when it happened. I'm upset about it because I'm a human being. And this was a tragedy. It's always a tragedy when one person takes another person's life unjustly. And a lot of lives were taken unjustly. And I'm going to say without provocation, because the athletes weren't on a battlefield. They didn't go to the Olympics and live in the Olympic Village because they wanted to fight with the Palestinians. They had no idea that this was going to happen. They weren't armed. They were there in the spirit of the game to represent Israel. And we all know what happened. And if you don't know what happened, we're about to find out what happened. Okay? So let's get started. For people that are wondering, or maybe not wondering, or don't even know what the issue is between the Israelis and the Palestinians, it's over land. It's over land because the British monarchy that had ruled over Palestine gave the land to the Jews, and it then became Israeli. And in 1948, and it's been a source of contention ever since. So, of course, Munich is in Germany. Germany has hosted 3 Olympic Games. In 1936, hello, Ronnie Lynn. In 1936, before World War II, Germany hosted both the Winter and the Summer Games. And then in 1972, they did the Summer Olympics, which is what we're going to talk about today. This is from the 1936 Olympics that were held in Germany. Obviously, it was before World War II. There's Hitler enjoying everything. And I think the Germans and everybody that participated probably enjoyed being a part of the game, not knowing that Hitler was going to lead them into a world war and how many Jewish lives were going to be lost. Fast forward to Munich 1972. Germany had a lot of vision for these games. They really wanted the games to be very carefree, very peaceful, fun. They really looked at it as a way to kind of revamp their image, if you will. Security was very loose. There's been a lot of talk. There was a lot of talk, especially by some of the insiders, that they had been tipped off. The Germans and the Olympic Committee had been tipped off that the Palestinians were planning an incident. and that was ignored. Palestinians, in fact, were most definitely planning an incident, and it wasn't spur of the moment. It wasn't an act of passion, a last moment act of passion. Many of the terrorists that were a part of the group that took the Israeli athletes hostage had secured positions in the Olympic Village while it was being constructed and made up. They had keys, they knew the layout, they knew where all the athletes were going to be housed. And so this was very, very well thought out. And it was carried out by members of a Palestinian terrorist group called Black September. Okay. And there we are, 1972, flags are flying, everybody is enjoying themselves. There's the Israeli Olympic team. Was made up of mostly men. There were 2 women. The women were housed someplace separately, and that's why they weren't taken hostage. Anki Spitzer, who is a widow of Andre Spitzer, he was the fencing coach. She said that the attitude and the temperature, if you will, of the Olympic Village was just one of joy. Everybody was getting along. There was lots of hugs and lots of goodwill. And she had been there with her husband, but left just a few days before the hostage situation because they had a young daughter named Anouk. And Anouk was at home with Anki's parents and was very ill. So Anki left her husband at the Olympics to go home and be with her daughter. But before she did, she was there with her husband, spending a lot of time. She was in and out of the Olympic Village. And she said at one point, her and her husband were at the Olympic Village, and they saw the Olympic athletes from Lebanon. And her husband said, I'm going to go over and say hi to them and wish them good luck. And Anki said she was shocked. She said, are you crazy? We're at war with Lebanon. What are you thinking? You can't go over there and talk to them. And he said, Anki, we're not at war here. There's no soldiers. There's no borders. I'm going to go and wish them luck and wish them well. And Anki said he did. And there was laughter and smiles and hugs. There was no ill will amongst any of the athletes, whether in their own countries they were at war with each other. Here in the Olympic Village, there was only goodwill and best wishes. There's some of the guys from the Israeli athlete team. That's Anki's husband that you'll see. It's on my right. He's got the dark glasses on. Couldn't see without his glasses. Anki said he was a fencing coach. And there they are. You can see that's the whole Olympic team, including the women. And it's said that the Olympic Games were going so well. Everything was on time. There was such a sense of joy and camaraderie, and it was going exactly the way that Germany had hoped it would. Until there we have Andre again. That's Anki's husband. Until there's Anki and their daughter Anouk. There's Anki just a few years ago. And then we get to the very early mornings of September 5th. Around 4:30 a.m., the members of Black September dressed as athletes. There's the Olympic Village. 4:30 a.m. they scaled a fence. There's some of the terrorists. I'm not even going to acknowledge them by name because it doesn't matter to me. I don't care. I don't care who they are. I'm not going to call them by their name. The only name I have for them is terrorists. That's it. That's all. If you want to go find out who they are, learn more about them, go for it. I don't care. They were attempting to hop a fence. They had bags full of, they looked like duffel bags or athletic bags. They were attempting to hop this fence. And right about the time they were trying to hop the fence, some athletes that were identified as Americans, later found out to be Canadians, came too. They had closed down a party themselves, and they were sneaking back into the Olympic Village. And they saw these guys, and they decided they would all help each other get over the fence into the Olympic Village. That is the building that the terrorists were aiming for. There were a lot of different athletes housed there. The Israelis had 3 rooms that were pretty much right in a row together. And as soon as they got over the fence and the Canadian athletes went to their housing unit, the terrorists gained entrance through an unlocked door into the first room. What was called 31 is what that was called. They got in there. They came across the first victim, named Moshe Weinberg. And Moshe tried to fight back. He was shot through the cheek. They then took him outside, and they were demanding that he show them where the other Israeli athletes were housed. Moshe went straight past, he took him straight past number 2, at the apartment number 2, telling them, no, there's some athletes from China housed in there, and he took them to apartment 3. It's thought that he took them to apartment 3 because that's where kind of all the big guys were housed, okay? The weightlifters, the wrestlers. And I'm sure his thought was that these 8 guys would never be able to compete with Olympic athletes of that size. But the Olympic athletes didn't have guns. There's Moshe, and there's Yosef Romano. Yosef Romano was a weightlifter. And Yosef did manage to fight off some of the terrorists as they tried to get into his room for a little bit, but he was soon overpowered. And unfortunately for Moshe, his plan or his thought about taking the terrorists to the room where the much larger, much stronger, trained athletes didn't work because the athletes were all asleep, so they were completely caught off guard. Once the terrorists had gathered the athletes that they could from apartment number 3, one athlete did manage to get out. He got out through breaking a window, and then he went through an underground garage and went to some other athletes' doors and alerted them. They took the rest of the athletes back to apartment number 1. And there they are. There's all the victims. Hello, Mary Lou, welcome. There's all the victims, including Mark Slavin up in the top. Mark had only come to be a part of the Israeli team 4 months before, and he was just 18 years old. By 6 a.m., the press was taking a look and were completely focused on the situation. Howard Cosell was one of the first TV journalists to begin calling some of his colleagues, telling them that, hey, you better get over there. Something's happening at the Olympic Village. And I guess Howard Cosell, I guess he was kind of a prankster. So a couple of the journalists didn't believe him until they saw what was going on in the news. Once the hostages were back in apartment 1, Moshe got a hold of a knife from the kitchen, and he attempted to go after a couple of the terrorists with it, and he was then shot and killed. Yosef Romano also tried to take on some of the terrorists, and Yosef was shot several times, though he didn't die for many hours later. He was taken into one of the bedrooms along with the rest of the hostages, laid down on the ground. He was going to just be left to slowly bleed out. The other athletes were one of the bigger ones was put in a chair and tied to it, wrapped up, almost like a mummy. They really had him tied there. The remaining athletes were put 4 to a bed. There were 2 beds in the bedroom, and their hands, their wrists, and their feet were bound together. The terrorists started peeking out of the windows. They started to make appearances on the balcony with their guns. And it appears that they were really trying to throw the authorities off regarding how many of them there were. Because some of the journalists noted that the terrorists would go back in and then change their clothes and come out. And so it was really hard for the authorities, the journalists, anybody watching to tell really accurately how many terrorists they were dealing with. They kind of took a guess and thought, well, it must be 5. There were actually 8 of them. And again, they had, rifles, hand grenades. It must have been a very scary situation. You can see there's the press. They're aimed right there. And the press, this caused a problem. For one, the German authorities weren't prepared for this. They were not prepared for a terrorist situation, a hostage situation. They didn't have anything such as hostage negotiators, nothing like that. And somewhere in the panic, they did not do what would be done today, which is cut off the electricity so that the terrorists couldn't watch TV. They left all that on. So the terrorists are inside watching and listening to everything that's going on. And there was an attempt. There's one of the terrorists right there. The German authorities did attempt a rescue early on. But again, because some of the German officers, again, because the terrorists are watching this on TV, they saw everything that was going on. They knew exactly what the police were doing. There's Yosef Romano. He's the weightlifter that was shot and left to bleed out on the floor while his colleagues were bound up and helpless to help him. There's the terrorist. The terrorist in the white hat was the leader. And I say that he was the leader because he was the one that began negotiations with the German authorities. And what they had was they had a list. At first, it was thought to be about 200 names. These were Palestinian prisoners that were, well, they were imprisoned by the Israelis. And these terrorists said, we want all of these, every name on this list to be released by 9 a.m. or we're going to kill the hostages. It later was found that it was actually over 300 names, and a couple of those names were the brothers of this leader. And the leader was half Jewish. And I don't know, and he was happy to say that. I don't know if he thought that that would garner him some sort of respect, or that Israel would be more willing to negotiate if they knew that they were dealing with a Jew. It didn't work that way. The Israelis were not going to release anybody. They were not going to give in to any type of hostage situation, because they felt that if they did, that would be taking hostages, threatening to kill people, that would become a norm. So they thought to themselves, if we give in now, this is just going to become a perpetual problem. Israeli and Palestine are still fighting, so it is a perpetual problem. Here's the leader, and he is negotiating with, hello Michaela, welcome. He's beginning to negotiate with some of the German authorities. The German authorities went to him, and this is the federal minister of the Interior. He offered himself up along with a lot of high-ranking Germans to take the place of the athletes, and the Palestinians weren't having that. They wanted the Israeli hostages. They wanted those athletes. The Germans also offered any amount of money. Any amount of money. The sky was the limit. The Palestinians said, we don't want your money. It's not what we're here for. We want all of those names, all of those prisoners on the list we gave you released. We're going to start killing the athletes. 9 a.m. came and went, and they continued to negotiate. They were able to push the, what do you want to call it, the time they had given, 9 a.m. was going to be when they started killing hostages, and they moved that to noon. Then they moved it until the afternoon. And then the leader said to them, okay, this is what we want. We want 2 helicopters, and then we want a plane, because we're going to take, we don't want to negotiate here anymore. We're going to take the hostages, and we're going to go to Cairo, to Egypt. The German authorities wanted to know how many hostages were still alive, if any of them were injured. Oh, yes, Ronnie, the leader of this terrorist group was half Jewish. His mother was a Jew. So, and these German authorities wanted inside. They wanted to go inside the Israeli athletes' housing, because they wanted to see for themselves who was alive. They thought maybe they could get a better number, a better guess on how many terrorists were involved. And the leader wasn't having that. He said, nobody's going in there. And so they said, well, we have to see something. We have to see someone that we can talk to, because for all we know, all the hostages could be dead already. So the leader called upstairs. Everybody was on the second floor, and he had one of the other terrorists bring Andre to the window, Andre Spitzer, the Israeli fencing coach. Andre spoke fluent German, so he was able to converse with the Germans. When the German authorities asked him, "Is there anybody hurt? Are you guys still alive? What's the number? How many hostages are in there?" The leader of the terrorists immediately called it off. Andre was hit on live television, was hit in the back with the butt of a rifle, a gun, a semi-automatic, and was tossed back inside. Anki, Andre's wife, was watching at home, watching all this happen live, and she said she knew that her husband couldn't even see without his glasses on, and she felt that it was just had to have been so humiliating and confusing for him, but she was grateful to see that he was still alive. And there he is. Now, meanwhile, the German authorities had gotten a hold of, they'd gotten a plan, and they'd gotten a hold of some athletic wear, and they were going to send in officers to climb down and surprise the terrorists through the door on the patio. We know that that didn't work because the terrorists were watching every move. You know, I'll tell you something that really rubbed me wrong about this, about the Olympic Committee giving the German authorities these athletic outfits. The authorities were told, you can have this athletic wear, these Olympic, jogging suits, whatever they are. You can have them, but we want them back in the morning, and they need to be washed and clean when you bring them back to us. Like, who cares? Who cares? Right? There they are. These are the officers. Another officer. Eventually, it was called off because the terrorists insisted get these officers and their guns off this building, away from this unit, or we'll kill them all. We'll kill all the hostages right now. So it was called off. The authorities stood down. I assume they went home and washed those jogging suits for the Germans just right away, don't you? And it was put in the paper, what a bloody blunder. Because the authorities screwed up by not cutting out the electricity and allowing the terrorists to watch everything play-by-play live. That was called off, and they went back into negotiations. The German authorities went back and began negotiating again with the leader. The leader of the terrorists said, okay, this is what we want. We want these helicopters. We're going to fly them in, and you're going to take us to a plane where we can leave and make it to Cairo. Look at all those journalists documenting every single thing. There's Joseph Romano. You can see why Moshe Weinberg had thought that if he could get the terrorists to apartment number 3, perhaps Joseph and some of his other weightlifting colleagues could have maybe overpowered these 8 terrorists. Of course, we know that that didn't work. There is the bus. It was pulled into the underground parking garage of the Olympic Village, and people could make out that the hostages were being loaded onto the bus. And that was the scene inside of the room. Pretty grim. Joseph again. Meanwhile, while the authorities are trying to get the helicopters and the plane set up and find a good airfield for that, they did find an airfield that was about 30 minutes away from the Olympic Village. And it was an airfield that wasn't used very often. And so they thought that that would be a perfect place to try again to ambush the terrorists and rescue the hostages. But inside that room, Moshe Weinberg, well, he was dead. His body was thrown outside of the apartment by the terrorists to show the authorities that they were serious, that they would start killing hostages. Of course, Moshe had been killed hours earlier, but the authorities didn't know that. For all they knew, he had just been murdered. The authorities finally got permission to send paramedics. I don't know if that's what they were necessarily called back then. Finally got permission to send paramedics into the Olympic Village to get Moshe Weinberg's body out. And while they were in there, they asked the leader, is there anybody else in there hurt? Does anybody need medical attention? And they were told by the terrorist, don't worry about that. You're not coming in here. Nobody's coming in here to look at anybody, to give anybody any attention. Not at all. Take this body, if that's what you want, and get out of here before we throw another one out. Inside, Yosef Romano, who had been lying on the floor, bleeding out, had been castrated by the terrorists. He was alive when they did that, because you don't bleed out after you're dead. He was alive. So I've seen a lot about this, obviously, and the Palestinians still insist that violence wasn't the goal. It wasn't what they wanted to do. But I would say that when you castrate a hostage who's been shot and is still alive, violence is absolute. It was absolutely an option for them. And I just find it very emotional, and I find it disgusting and incredibly sad. And I cannot imagine the effect that must have had on his friends and the other athletes, because they're tied up. They can't help. And they had to have wondered who's next. You can imagine in that situation, there's Yosef, as he was found later. You have to imagine what it must have been like for those athletes, when probably every 5 minutes, 5 or 10 minutes, someone would say, let's just kill them all now. And somebody else would say, no, not yet. Not yet. We still need them. And then 10 minutes later, somebody goes, no, let's kill them now. There's Joseph's body after the terrorists left with the other hostages, and the authorities were able to go inside of that room. This was Avery. He was the Olympic Commission president. There were a lot of talks about stopping the game. And good old Avery, he wasn't having it. He said, no, the games must go on. This caused a lot of protests, a lot of discourse. A lot of people believe that the games should have been stopped altogether. They were temporarily suspended later on in the day, but not for very long. And then the games continued. And I can't even imagine what that must have been like for the other athletes. Some people really agreed with having the games go on. They felt like if they had stopped the games, the Palestinians would have gotten what they wanted. Complete attention. The Palestinians said, look, we wanted these prisoners released, and we wanted the world to recognize how Palestine had been robbed from them. And they wanted the world to have a sympathy for their cause and the fact that they felt displaced. And many had had to leave and go to Lebanon as refugees. Some were in camps. I don't think it worked. I don't think anybody felt sorry for them. Because this isn't the way you go about evoking sympathy for your cause. Doesn't work. These are some signs that some of the protesters made and carried with them. There is the bus pulling up to one of the helicopters that's going to take. There's 2 helicopters that were sent in. 4 hostages were put in each one, along with terrorists to watch them. They were still bound by their hands. And I can't imagine what's going through their mind. Andre Spitzer's widow, at the time she was his wife, she said she was very concerned. She was with her parents, and her mother said, oh, this is a good sign, Andre, if they're going to take them someplace else so that these negotiations can keep on going. And Andre said, don't be crazy. I don't believe that for a moment. As soon as they take them to another country, we won't know anything that's going on with my husband or his colleagues. And I think she was right. Egypt didn't really want any part of this. Like, German authorities had called and were speaking to the Egyptian officials, and they were asking them, look, if we let this plane leave and it lands in Cairo, we need your help to ambush the terrorists and get these hostages out alive. And Egypt said, no, we're not getting involved in this at all. So the authorities felt that the only The only option that they had was going to be the ambush at the airport. That's the helicopter as it was flying into the Olympic Village, one of the helicopters as it was flying into the Olympic Village. And there is landing at the airport, the airfield. That's the control tower. I'm going to try to say the name of the airfield, but listen, a lot of these names really, they're hard. Furstenfeldbruck, I think is what it's called. That is the control tower. Up in the control tower, you had the director of the Mossad, but he was only there in the capacity to take a report. His report was going to go back to the Prime Minister, Golda Meir, and another one of the high-ups. And these are some excerpts from his report. He said that when the helicopters first landed, they had sharpshooters above. Oh, Michaela says I got the name right. Yay! He said when the helicopters first landed, obviously all day, the German authorities, while trying to negotiate with the terrorists, they were preparing the airfield. So there were sharpshooters on top of the control tower. There were sharpshooters surrounding and over 400 German authorities had surrounded the airfield. But none of them had radios. They had no way to communicate with each other or with anybody in charge. They were simply going to wait until the terrorists came out of the helicopter with the hostages, and then they were going to attempt to take the terrorists out. So one of the first things in the report said, hey, look, we had everybody in position, and the helicopters are coming in, and at this point, we were very encouraged. They thought that they could carry this out and be successful. They only thought that there were 5 terrorists, remember? Because the terrorists kept switching outfits. But they thought that they had figured out who was actually who in each outfit. So they really thought that there was only 5. And because they hadn't been allowed inside of the building of the Olympic Village, they were just taking a guess. There were actually 8 terrorists instead of 5. The terrorists were, for some reason, even though the German authorities had all day to plan this out, and most certainly the authorities knew the type of weaponry that the terrorists had. They had all day to figure that out. The snipers were shooting with pistols. That's like taking a knife to a gunfight against the terrorists, considering the weaponry that they had. So very quickly, the director of the Mossad kind of realized, oh, crap, we're screwed. We're outgunned. We're outgunned. This isn't going to work. But he didn't have any way to communicate with anybody. Three terrorists were holding 400 German officers at bay because they had grenades and automatic weapons. I don't know why no German authorities had automatic weapons when they went to the airfield, because we saw that the police officers, that they dressed in athletes' clothing, most certainly had automatic weapons. We saw that. So who didn't? You had automatic weapons and you were planning to go. That would have been the time to take in a pistol. If you're going to go in through the sliding glass door on the balcony, that's the time for a pistol. Where were the automatic weapons at the airfield? The director of the Mossad, in his report, said that he felt that the Germans did not put their best foot forward, that there was an inexcusable bare minimum of effort put in to save the lives of the athletes. And I have to agree. Where the plan really started to go wrong was when the leader of the terrorists and another one of his little friends here exited one of the helicopters. They wanted to go to the airplane to check it out. They wanted to make sure it wasn't a trick. What happened when they got onto the airplane? They realized there was no flight crew. The authorities hadn't even bothered to dress a couple officers up as pilots and have them waiting in the airplane. So as soon as the terrorists saw there's not even a pilot on this plane, this is a trick, this is a setup, they took off out of the airplane and started running back towards the helicopters. And the German authorities opened fire. They shot and killed the leader. They wounded the second terrorist, but he was still able to return fire for a little while. You can see where the helicopters are compared to where the plane was. So if they had just had some German authorities, this is what I believe, I really believe it. If they had had officers inside that plane and had taken those two guys out, maybe some of this tragedy could have been avoided. Instead, when those terrorists were shot at, when they were almost back to the helicopters, the snipers waited a good little while before shooting at them. And in fact, the second terrorist, when he was shot, he managed to make it to one of the helicopters, and he kind of hunkered down. And because of the shadows that were being cast from those huge helicopter blades, it made it very difficult for the snipers to even see him. So that's how he was able to return fire for quite some time. The other 6 terrorists that were in the helicopters, of course, realized that something had gone very wrong. And you have to understand this about these terrorists. I don't think they wanted to die. I don't think they had a death wish. I don't think that was part of the plan. But they were willing to die. And the German authorities knew it. They had made that very clear. We're willing to die today. These hostages don't mean anything to us. Their lives mean nothing. Your lives mean nothing. Our lives mean nothing. How do you negotiate with somebody who doesn't care? Who lives and dies? How do you negotiate with that? That's not a negotiation. That's not a negotiation. That's not negotiable. Shots were heard from inside of one of the helicopters. And then there was an explosion inside the second one. And the first reports that went out said the hostages are free. They're free. No. This is a spokesperson for the German government. He was in a TV studio, and he said, you know, these hostages, you know, we're going to kill the terrorists, we're going to rescue the hostages, and all of this will be forgotten in a couple of weeks. When they got news, hey, all the hostages are free, they made it, the terrorists are dead, and then a call comes in that in fact none of the hostages, none of the athletes were alive. That is what was left of the helicopter where the grenade had been detonated. The personnel that went in to recover the bodies, to look for survivors, said that it was actually really hard to tell what some of the hostages had died from. Some, in one helicopter, it was very clear they had been shot to death. They'd been executed. But some of the athletes that were in the helicopter where the grenade was detonated, a couple, they said, had most likely died of smoke inhalation because the authorities weren't able to get in right away. Even after this happened, there was still gunfire going back and forth between the terrorists and the snipers. So it was maybe 3:30 in the morning before the authorities were really able to get in there. This is the interior of the helicopter where the athletes had been executed by being shot. You can see the one helicopter on the right where the grenade had been detonated is a shell almost. There are some of the athletes after they had been shot. You can see that their hands are still bound. And I find it very haunting. I find it very haunting that in 1972, there was Jewish blood on German soil. I find that picture very, 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 very haunting. And not just because I'm Jewish, because I'm human. Again, this was about 3:30 in the morning on September 6th. Remember, this all started at 4:30 in the morning on September 5th when the terrorists hopped the gate into the Olympic Village. Those are flowers that were left outside of the Israeli athletes' the apartment after it was discovered that none of the hostages had survived. There are the caskets. The bodies were flown back to Israel. This is Abu Jihad, the leader of Black September, and was thought to have been the mastermind of the entire plot. And he thinks they did good. He's like, we have the world's attention now. Now they'll listen to us. Everybody had such a bad opinion of us. But nobody really knew us. And now they know us. Now they see us. No remorse. No remorse. No remorse even for the terrorists. I get that. I don't care about those guys either. But this one is like, good job. We did it. Hello, Spirit, welcome. Welcome. Once all the families had been notified that their loved ones were dead, Anke Spitzer, the German officials, authorities said, look, we got to go into this apartment, into this housing unit of the athletes, and we need to start getting this stuff out. And Anke said, I want to go in. I want to go in and get my husband's things. And they said, no. And she said, yes. She said, I have a right. I have a right to see where my husband spent the last hours of his life. And you're going to find out Anke Spitzer, she's a fighter. So she said to get to the second floor apartment where they had been held, she had to go up. Obviously, she had to go up some stairs. And the stairs were covered in blood from where they had brought the hostages down. And she said when she got inside of the room, it was chaos. There's Anke right there. You can see the shotgun blast in the wall. You can see that's one of the beds where 4 of the athletes had been found. There was food in there. The German authorities had sent food in for the hostages. None of it was touched. The hostages were not allowed to use the bathroom. They weren't allowed to eat or drink. And I don't think any of them had an appetite. I mean, they had watched Joseph Romano slowly bleed to death on the floor right in front of them after being shot and castrated while still alive. This is what she found when she went in to get her husband's things. And you can see right there is right at the end of that one bed, you can see where Joseph Romano's body had been left to die. Spirit says humans can be such awful beings. Yes, they can. Joseph Romano. Joseph Romano. Moshe Weinberg. His was the body that was thrown out so the terrorists could let the German authorities know that they meant business. This is a cemetery in Israel where the athletes were taken back and buried. And you can see on top of all of their tombstones are the Olympic rings. That's something that all of us recognize as representing the Olympics. And I'm going to say this. I put this stream off for a while because the Olympics were going on, and I think that the Olympics are meant to be a time of joy and celebration. Competition, yes, but it's a showing of the world coming together. And so I just could not bring myself to do this stream while those Olympics were going on. And it's not that I don't think that people need to be reminded of this, because obviously I do, or I wouldn't be doing the stream. But I just didn't feel right doing it during the Olympics. And there was the leader on the cover of one of the newspapers said, "I'll die for Palestine today." Go ahead. Already been through 100 of these slides. I'm going to add a second round of slides for you. Anke Sisser said she went home. She had this tiny little baby. She was now a widow, a very, very young widow. And she said the first 2 months after this happened, she wouldn't have been able to take care of herself or her child if it hadn't been for her parents. But she said she was so filled with hatred and anger that she almost couldn't function. And somehow, after 2 months, she snapped out of it, and she made up her mind that she was going to make sure that the 11 athletes, which included her dead husband and his friends and colleagues, that they would be remembered. And she made that a goal, even though she remarried later on and she became a journalist. She never stopped trying to get recognition from the Olympic Committee, to recognize what had happened, to recognize these athletes. She never stopped asking the German authorities for all the documentation that they had on this. And the Germans, for years and 20 years, the Germans denied having any documentation about this. And Anke Spitzer said, "I know the Germans. The Germans document every single thing. They have documents. They know what happened. They have pictures. They know who is behind this. And for 20 years, what is the problem? Who's crying? I hear one of the dogs crying." This was right before the next Olympics, the 1976 Olympics. And there's Jimmy Carter, and these are some of the delegates from the Olympic Committee. And Anke went and said, "We have to do something to acknowledge what happened in 1972, even if it's a moment of silence." And this is what she was told. She said, "We need some kind of commemoration." And she was told there are 21 Arab delegations that will leave, that will pull out of the Olympics if we say anything about the Israeli athletes. And Anke said, she said, "Well, let them go. Let them go. They are not more important than the 11 Israeli athletes that lost their lives. They are not more important. Oh, Spirit, that's very nice. Spirit says, thank you for being brave enough to tell us. Well, it's not bravery. It's very painful. But I don't take really any pleasure in any of the streams that I give. I always feel, what is the matter? Oh, one dog stole the other dog's treat. What is this injustice? What? There, did she take that from you? Oh, terrorism. Street terrorism happening right under my own feet. Yes, I know what you did to your sister. I know what you did right there. Red turkey. All right. Oops. All right. 40 years. Every time the Olympics rolled around, Anki would go and speak and say, we need a moment of silence. We need some kind of acknowledgement for what happened. Because if we don't acknowledge it, it could happen again. 40 years. When London hosted the Olympics in 2012, Anke had gone before the committee course again. Okay? 40 years had passed. She remarried, had other children. Her daughter, her and Andre Spitzer's daughter, Anouk, was a grown woman at this point. Anke was not going to stop fighting. And the London people that were involved with planning the London Olympics says, no, we can't. We can't acknowledge them. We can't do that. That's not what the Olympics are about. Yet, during the opening ceremonies, they had a virtual memorial wall put up during one of the other Olympics for victims of a terrorist act on a subway. And Anke said, look, hey, those people deserve to be acknowledged too. But don't you think it would be appropriate at the Olympics to acknowledge Olympic athletes that were killed in the Olympic Village? Didn't happen. But in the Atlanta Olympic Games, she finally got that moment. And she had gone there with some of the other widows and their children because she knew that there would be this moment of silence. And this is the opening ceremonies in Atlanta. The Israeli team coming out. There they are. And Anke said she had spoken to the children. Well, they were adults, right, at this point. And she had said, what are you going to do? She had asked them, what are you going to do when the Palestinian athletes come out? What are you going to do? How is that going to make you feel? And she said that the children said, they're athletes, right? They're Olympic athletes. They're there to represent their country. They didn't kill our fathers. So we're going to cheer for them. Just like we're cheering for everybody else that comes out. Those are some of the children. That's Anouk. in the black dress, Anke and Andre's daughter. And when the Palestinian Olympic athletes made their way, those kids did cheer. In 2015, there was talk of putting up a memorial for the Munich victims. Now we're 43 years down the road. And in 2016, it happened. This is the memorial in Munich for those athletes that were murdered. And here are some pictures that are compliments of Michaela. Michaela, thank you. Michaela visited the memorial, and she also visited the Olympic Village, and she took, well, it's not the Olympic Village anymore. Now they're actually apartments, but this is what it looks like now. What was formerly the Olympic Village. Michaela, thank you for sharing these. YOLO, it says, you only live once. A plaque. And there they are. There's Moshe Weinberg. He's the third from the left. He was the one, he was the first hostage that was killed. 33 years old. Mark Slavin, 18 years old. Andre Spitzer, 27. Down there, he's the second from the right on the second row. And I said I was only 4 years old when this happened, so I didn't have a clue. I was just in my own little 4-year-old world in a Jewish household. And Michaela, thank you for sharing them. I didn't use all of them, but thank you for sharing them. And I'm just going to say, let's have a moment of silence for these victims. Because it makes me very sad. Because they didn't go there to fight. They went there to represent their country. And they worked hard to get there. And they left their families. And they had no idea. So let's just have a moment. thank you all so much for coming and sharing this with me today. I hope you understand a little bit more about the history of the Palestinians and the Israelis. I hope you know a little bit more about this incident. And I hope that, like me, whenever the Olympics roll around, that we remember the Olympics has changed a lot of things. Security in the Olympic Village is a lot tougher than it was back then. People could go in and out of the Olympic Village. Andre Spitzer's wife, she could go in and out. The athletes, the Israeli athletes that night had gone the night before, September 4th, the night before this happened. They had gone to a production of Fiddler on the Roof, and they had gone out to dinner with the star of that. And one of the athletes' sons, 13-year-old son, was very close to a couple of the athletes that were wrestlers, and he had asked his father, "Can I come back and spend the night with you and everybody in the Olympic Village?" And his father said, no, and I'm sure saved his son's life. So back then, the Olympic Village was a lot looser. Now you're not getting in there for love or money if you're not an athlete or a coach. So they have tightened that down. But yet the war between Israel and Palestine rages on, and I don't think there's angels on either side of it, Jewish or not. I would be upset about this if terrorists had been Jews and the victims had been Palestinians, because this was just a cruel and senseless thing. The Mossad, which is pretty much like the FBI or the CIA or MI6, they did go after the leaders. They sanctioned the murder of some of the higher-ups that they felt had planned and played a big part in this act. And I think that that's tragic too. I think that it's tragic too. A lot of lives were lost. And a lot of lives were changed forever. And it's just very, very, very sad. And I just wonder when, as human beings, we're going to get tired of all this war. Because it's just senseless. So, thank you for joining me. Spirit says thank you. Trish is sending hearts. Ryan Lynn sending hearts. Ryan Lynn says thanks for all the work, and thank you, Michaela, for the pictures. Yes, Michaela, thank you for the pictures. I felt that it was important to show that even at the Olympic Village, which is now apartments, life goes on. Life goes on. And I'm so glad that Anke Spitzer and the children of the athletes who lost their fathers and the wives who lost their husbands and the mothers and fathers who lost their sons. I'm so glad that they finally got a memorial, because it's kind of hard to ignore that. So thank you. I know it was a very sad stream. I cried myself. But if you enjoyed it, please like the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. I don't do as many as I used to, but I try at least once a month, once every 2 weeks. Okay. So, Trish says uh, they will be at peace now. Well, we hope so. We hope so, right? Thank you all for coming. Mary Lou, you're welcome. You're welcome. I would like to say it was my pleasure to bring this to you. It wasn't a pleasure. It was very painful. Um, for me, I had a really hard time doing this one. But thank you, thank you, thank you. Kayla says she has more pictures on Facebook, and she did send me more. I just had a hard time putting together the slides. It was very hard for me. So thank you again so much. I will see you guys the next time. I'm now going to shake this off somehow because I do have another live stream of virtual kitchen coming up. So I need to shake it off somehow. Thank you for coming and staying and being with me while we acknowledge this moment. And have a blessed day and be kind. Be kind to one another. Bye-bye.